Glen and Bessie Hyde were married in Twin Falls, Idaho on April 10, 1928. He was 27, she had just turned 18. At the end of summer that year, they constructed a boat for a planned honeymoon adventure, a trip down the Colorado River to California. Glen was an experienced river rafter who wanted to set a new speed record for traveling through the Grand Canyon, which would have put Bessie in the book as the first documented woman to do so. Sometime during that trip, the young couple disappeared forever. What was supposed to be a record-breaking boat trip through the Grand Canyon turned into a mystery that remains unsolved nearly 100 years later. Glen and Bessie were young and in love and had their whole lives ahead of them. All of it was lost on the Colorado River in 1928. The couple's disappearance has of course spawned many theories over the years. Join me as we try and put the pieces of the puzzle together. On October 20th, 1928, the pair started their journey. Life jackets were not a standard boating trip accessory in those days, and so this posed a risk right from the start. During their trip, they visited an experienced river rafter in Utah. He told them that the boat they had built was not safe for their trip. He was especially concerned about them not taking life jackets. However, the couple were young and felt invincible. They took 26 days to get from Utah to the Bright Angel Trail in the heart of the canyon. They were last seen on November the 18th. 2 days earlier, they had their photograph taken by Emery Kolb at his studio and home situated in the middle of the Grand Canyon. He was well known in the area and had documented the canyon extensively. Emery Kolb's young daughter came to bid them farewell just before the Hydes walked out of sight, and Bessie remarked on the smartly dressed little girl's outfit. "I wonder if I shall ever wear pretty shoes again," Bessie said to the girl. Then the couple said their goodbyes, boarded their boat, and continued their journey along the Colorado River. Kolb said that Bessie seemed ready to quit the journey, but Glen encouraged her not to give up, and they headed out the next day. Adolph G. Sutro, grandson of a notable former mayor of San Francisco, embarked on the journey with the couple for several miles and was the last known person to see them. Emery Kolb tried to warn them of the dangers ahead. He invited them to stay with him throughout the winter and wait until the weather improved. When they declined this offer, he tried to get them to accept spare life jackets. However, Glen refused all his offers. When the pair didn't make it to Needles, California by their planned arrival date in December, a massive search ensued, led by Kolb. The military called in aerial surveillance, and Native American trackers were employed. The search party located and reached the Hydes' abandoned boat on December the 24th. This was just the beginning of a gigantic mystery. Instead of a splintered wrecked boat, it was perfectly intact. All the supplies were accounted for, neatly packed and organized, and the location didn't quite necessitate them abandoning their craft in a hurry. They had traveled 600 miles on the Green and Colorado rivers. The boat was just 46 miles from the mouth of the Grand Canyon, and according to the details of the journal, they had actually been ahead of schedule. There is evidence they made it as far as River Mile 225, where they may have made camp. Their bodies were not found at this location, but it is possible they were lost around River Mile 232. The Hydes were nowhere to be seen, and there was no apparent clues as to what might have happened. Their boat displayed no evidence of being battered by rapids or of having capsized in rough water. Their food and supplies were still carefully strapped down, as if awaiting patiently the return of the couple, who would never set up camp again. No footprints led away from the boat, no disturbance was apparent on the river bank, no bodies had turned up downstream. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air. What happened to them remains a mystery to this day. Guides down the Colorado River still bring up their strange disappearance while sitting around the campfire at night, sipping beers and reflecting on what might have befallen the Hydes. Glen was an expert boat builder, and years before had spent time rafting down Idaho's Salmon and Snake rivers. He wasn't exactly an expert on the rapids, but he was certainly very knowledgeable of the river and route. Although Bessie was a greenhorn before they began their trip, she still had a few solid weeks of negotiating rapids under her belt. In 1971, decades after the disappearance of Glen and Bessie Hyde, a group of men were taking their boats down the Colorado River. They spotted an older woman who was rafting down the river alone. They invited her to join the group, and she introduced herself as Georgie Clark. That evening, the rafting tour guide began to tell the legend of Glen and Bessie Hyde around the campfire. The old woman abruptly said that she was Bessie Hyde. She said she had argued with Glen during the trip as he wanted to complete the journey, but she had had enough. After he started beating her, she retaliated by stabbing him to death and disposing of his remains. Interestingly, she was of the correct age that Bessie would have been at that point. This woman said everything so matter-of-factly that everyone around the campfire were inclined to believe her. Later, one of the men in the group looked up Georgie Clark's phone number in the phone directory and rang her to see if she would do an interview to tell her side of the story. She now denied everything, saying that she never claimed to be Bessie Hyde, and abruptly hung up the phone. Of course, if she really was Bessie Hyde, she would have realized to continue along this path and confess to murdering her husband would have severe consequences. However, what makes this scenario highly unlikely is, if she did kill him in the heat of the moment, why leave all their belongings behind in the boat? This would have meant being alone in the middle of the Grand Canyon, miles away from civilization, in the middle of a freezing winter. Georgie Clark had also told her best friends that she was Bessie Hyde, but she never showed them any proof of it. She also never let her friends come over to visit her at home. After she passed away, her best friends decided to search her home to look for any evidence of her claims. When they went through her belongings, they found some interesting items that seemed to suggest her story might be true. They found a birth certificate that revealed Georgie's real name to be Bessie DeRoss. They also found a marriage certificate for Bessie and Glen Hyde. In her underwear drawer, she had kept a pistol. It was getting exciting to think that the mystery might soon be solved. But after finding photographs of Georgie when she was much younger, she looked drastically different to Bessie Hyde. They were not the same person. So, was Georgie Clark so entrenched in her lies that she had a fake birth and marriage certificate made? Or is it possible she stole these documents from the Hyde's boat? In the 1970s, Emery Kolb, the photographer who met Glen and Bessie Hyde, passed away. When relatives were clearing out his house, they found a complete skeleton of a human man hidden in a canoe in his boathouse. The skeleton was a Caucasian man who was measured to be over 6 feet tall. He had died by a single bullet to the head. Everyone of course believed that 50 years after their disappearance, they had finally found the body of Glen Hyde, and that Emery Kolb must have murdered him. However, when scientists compared overlay photographs of Hyde's skull to the skull from Emery Kolb's boathouse, they found the facial structures to be fundamentally different. Whoever the poor soul in the canoe was, it wasn't Glen Hyde. It doesn't explain, though, why Kolb had the remains of someone who had met a violent death in his boathouse. A plausible theory is that one of the Hydes fell into the frigid waters of the Colorado River, and the other jumped in immediately in an attempt to save their beloved. Hypothermia would have set in rapidly, and the freezing temperature would have quickly sent them into cold shock response, causing them to hyperventilate, and without life jackets they would have been swept up in the rapids and carried down the river. The boat was sturdy and gently floated into the next natural harbour. It had been a month since the boat's discovery and the estimated time they disappeared. Their remains would have been eaten by fish and scattered in the waters of the Grand Canyon. Bessie and Glen made their Grand Canyon River run at a time when adventurers were like major celebrities. A successful voyage would have certainly made headline news. Explorers like Charles Lindbergh and George Mallory captured the world's attention with their daring outdoor escapades, and the Hydes wanted to emulate them. After their record-breaking honeymoon was over, they planned to travel and make money by hosting lectures about their trip. They have certainly made it into the newspapers, and their names are recorded in history, but not in a way they would have ever imagined. So, my dear oddite armchair detectives, what happened? What happened to this adventurous pair who were on their honeymoon? Now, the obvious theory is that they were tipped out of their boat and vanished into the swirling waters, and that the boat drifted down into a natural harbour. That's the obvious theory. But there are a few things in this case which really sort of niggle at the back of my mind. And I'm afraid it's this Emery Kolb. I can't help it. When I looked at the photo of these brothers' faces, my gut instinct, and it's no doubt subjective, my gut instinct says I would not trust these two. And so far in my life, my gut instinct has proved to be amazingly accurate in judging people's characters. I mean, he might be a decent bloke. I might have it totally wrong. They might be decent guys. I might have it totally wrong. But then we come to the fact that a skeleton was found in his boathouse with a bullet hole through the skull, through the head. I mean, how does one explain that? If it had been a suicide, if a young guy had committed suicide on Kolb's property or near it, then of course the natural thing to do would be to inform the authorities and say, look, some young guy's shot himself on my property. So therefore I tend to believe that somebody shot this person, who they found obviously years later. I don't know whether they've done any carbon dating on the bones to discern when exactly or approximately when that person died, at least what decade, but it's extremely suspicious, isn't it? And the fact that this Adolf Sutro was the last person to see them alive. He maybe thought he was the last person to see them alive, but was he? And the person who said that Bessie seemed ready to quit, according to the research I have looked at, was Emery Kolb. And if she voiced that opinion to someone else, it's not written down in the history as far as I can see it. So again, we have to rely on Emery Kolb's statement on that. The rumours are around. I don't know where these rumours started that he was abusive to her. But look at this photo. Do they look unhappy? Does she look like she has any sign of apprehension in her face? She might have put that smile on for the camera, but would you embark on such an expedition with someone who is abusive, physically or mentally? To me, she looks very keen to enjoy this adventure. And, I must point out, she's quite an attractive woman. And if you're living out there, now I know Kolb was married, I know that, when he had children, or a child at least, but would the temptation be there? I don't want to cast aspersions. He might have been a totally decent bloke, but I have to look at this avenue of thought. Did he then follow them down the river after Adolf Sutra left them? It's possible. Then again, it could be somebody else. There could be some hermit, who hasn't seen a woman in a few years and spied them and decided to attack. That's also quite possible. Or the more mundane and tragic explanation is that they capsized, or that they were tipped off the boat, which carried on down. I mean, their remains would disappear. The fish would quickly eat them in the swirling waters. I don't think we'll ever know, but that just keeps nagging at me. And I'm going to read out some newspaper extracts that I didn't find online readily available. I did some microfiche research and found newspaper statements from Kolb, his theory and, his story behind it. And you tell me what you think. Before we do that, let's quickly highlight the Georgie Clark strange mystery, which is not really a mystery. We know that Georgie Clark was not Bessie Hyde. They were a different height. Georgie was considerably taller than Bessie. They looked totally different. Georgie Clark was apparently nearly illiterate, whereas Bessie was a poet. I will read out a little excerpt from her poetry at the end. So, they're not the same person at all. Plus, Georgie's early life was quite documented, even of a young age. So, it's definitely not her. Why would she make up some sort of story like that? From a statement apparently made by herself, she thought that she was the only woman who could ride that river. One interesting fact that I uncovered was that Georgie Clark could not stand the sight of Emery Kolb. She couldn't bear to be in the same room as him. Why? I don't know. Was it professional jealousy? Did they have, was it just a clash of personalities? I cannot comment on that, but that's something that I also uncovered. So let's have a look at Kolb's statements now. So this is a snippet from a newspaper at the time. The headlines first. Continue search for honeymooners in Grand Canyon. Honeymooners? Okay. Search for Mr. and Mrs. Glen Hyde of Hanson, Idaho, adventurous honeymoon couple who disappeared in the Grand Canyon of the Colorado, continues tediously on foot and by boat. Searchers have established that the Hydes actually entered the section of the canyon under scrutiny. What do they mean by that, under scrutiny? Scrutiny by whom? But what became of them, there is much a mystery as ever. The homemade scow in which they were attempting to traverse the length of the treacherous river was found at Separation Rapids by Army aviators, flying low over the stream, and footprints of Hyde were seen by P.P. Pawpraw, I hope I pronounced that right, leader of a searching party at Bass Cable Crossing and Ruby Rapids downstream from the scow. Now, as you can see in the official research that I found, no footprints were found anywhere near the boat. This would directly contradict that there were footprints. I don't know how they can tell that was footprints from Hyde. They didn't say which Hyde, her or him. So if there's only one set of footprints, that either suggests somebody found the boat and walked away again, or that only one of them actually came onto land and walked away. That's very strange. That contradicts the research that I found online about footprints being around the boat. One last disturbing theory as to why there might be one set of footprints leading away from the boat was that somebody murdered and disposed of the Hydes and then travelled further down the river in that boat, stopping at that natural harbour, and then made their way back inland either to their boat further up the river or to wherever they were from. That's also a theory that we have to look at. Okay, this is another newspaper snippet of the Time statement made by Emery Kolb. Think Hydes lost in the Colorado. Believe man and wife perished on canoe trip. Find logbook notes. Adventuresome couple who started out from Idaho to sail river to California shot 16 rapids in one day. I'm guessing that is recorded in their logbook. Conviction that Glen R. Hyde and his wife perished in the swirling waters of the Colorado River, which they attempted to navigate on a honeymoon trip, was expressed here today by Emery Kolb, veteran riverman. Kolb and his brother Ellsworth, first men to navigate the Grand Canyon, returned last night after a hazardous journey in the deep gorges in search of the venturesome Hanson, Idaho couple who left Bright Angel Trail in their homemade scow November the 18th. The Hydes expected to reach Needles, California about December the 1st. The riverman reported that examination of the scow used by the couple to shoot the river rapids indicated that disaster had overtaken them December the 1st near where the craft was found, lodged in the rocks which clogged the tortuous canyon riverbed and where it was seen by Army aviators who joined in the extensive search begun 2 weeks ago. Kolb also reported that the scow was lodged but a short distance from shore, and that it would have been possible for the couple to have reached there safely had they still been aboard. Clothing, food, camping equipment and other supplies found in the scow, Kolb pointed out, was further indication that the Hydes were not aboard when the craft stranded. The presence of this equipment also furnished evidence that, if the couple had gained the shore, they were scantily prepared to face the rigours of severe canyon weather and any necessary hike to reach distant aid. Footprints unexplained. The Kolb's theory leaves unexplained, however, the finding of footprints in the snow at points along the canyon river above Diamond Creek by searchers who believed the prints had been made by the Hydes in attempting to return to civilization. So now it's not one set of print but two sets of prints that they appear to have found, which is not in the accepted accounts that I've read online, who said there was no prints. So now we have two sets of prints, they're saying. The brothers who made the first journey down the canyon 17 years ago set out from Diamond Creek 8 days ago and recounted an extremely hazardous trip down the river. After reaching the scow and making a thorough examination of the surrounding territory, they continued down the river in their boat, which was upset in the Separation Rapids. The searchers were thrown into the raging waters but managed to cling to the boat and finally were carried into calm water. After rescuing themselves, the brothers said they traversed 8 miles of wild country in which they were unable to find a stick of firewood. I guess any experienced riverman down that way would know how treacherous the rapids are and were, and this would, in all probability, account for their fate, that they were flipped from the boat, made it to shore without their supplies, and tried to reach civilization in frigid weather, and perished along the route. And it really breaks my heart. If that did happen, I hope they died together. I hope one wasn't left, to leave the other one behind and try and trudge on further only to also perish. That's a horrible thought. Wherever they are, I hope they're at peace now, and I hope they're floating on calm celestial waters somewhere. Well, as I said at the end, they have their name down in history, not in a way they would have expected or wanted. Well, my dear friends, I'm just about to leave you very soon. Let us not say leave, let us not say goodbye, let us say auf Wiedersehen, which means until we meet again. And I hope we will meet again. I hope you're going to hang around for a while. But before I go, I shall read a poem that Bessie wrote in the years preceding her marriage to Mr. Hyde, when she was called Bessie Haley. It's a rather eerie and prescient poem. I think you'll agree with me once you hear it. Oh, Mama, dear, please come. My dolly must be drowned. When I put her on the creek, she sunk without a sound. Wee Betty's eyes filled with tears. Where could poor Dolly be? Perhaps she'd turned into a mermaid and drifted out to sea.